FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and guess what? It's 12/20/19. Well, we're going to be doing a reduced schedule next week because my kids are here. I will, however, be doing at least one show per day. It'll get posted the regular time. We're shooting for between 7 and 8 a.m. every morning. That's really been working out well. And, well, we're talking now about the high cost of education, student loan crisis, the student loan bubble. What happened? How did we get here? What is it doing? How is it distorting the economics of getting a college education? I will tell you that when my sister went to Douglas College, which is now part of Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, in the mid-'60s, her tuition was a whopping $50. I think it was $50 a semester, if you could believe it. And I think her dormitory facilities were $100 a month. So 100, it cost roughly her whole education somewhere south of $5,000. And honestly, her education was better than what they received now. When I went to school, and not so good a school, I went to Pace University, my total education was under $15,000. That was 12 years later. And I was pretty much an okay student. Then I got motivated at the end, but $15,000. And now that very same school, Pace University, it's costing upwards of $50,000 per year. We're not even talking about room and board. So how did we get this way? Well, I've been reading works, in my job as a professional podcaster, I tend to read 200 to 300 articles per day from various sources. I like news aggregation sites without a political bent, or at least ones where they're not throwing it in your face. But I'll read 200 to 300 articles per day, maybe 1,000 per week. And I've been seeing a lot of work coming up, a lot of articles from the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. And the person you're about to hear from, Richard K. Vedder, just wrote an article, New Research Shows Federal Student Aid is Worse Than We Thought. And you're just not going to believe how bad it really is. So, Richard, I want to welcome you on the show. Really appreciate your coming on. Just tell us a little bit. I know you're not a full-time employee of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, but just tell us about this center and how it came about and what it's doing.
Sure. A very successful businessman in North Carolina by the name of Art Pope, P-O-P-E, started a research center for higher education issues, a generation or so ago, maybe 20 years ago. At the time, it was called the Pope Center, but in more recent years, he named it after James Martin, who was a former governor of the state of North Carolina. The center started out to be exclusively devoted to issues relating to North Carolina higher education. Why are the costs rising so much, say, at the University of North Carolina or at Duke, other fine schools? North Carolina does have a lot of fine higher educational institutions. So the Martin Center has grown in recent years and employs several first-rate people, researchers who work there. And I occasionally will write a piece myself for them, and quite a number of others do as well. And I think they do a great service because they've called attention to some of the problems that we're facing on a national basis. Increasingly, the Martin Center has become more national in its orientation. They once had me come down to the University of North Carolina and speak to their Board of Governors. The Martin Center had some connections, I guess, and the Board of Governors asked me to speak to them about the difficulties of running universities. So the Martin Center does useful things like that, trying to lead to better higher education in that state.
And effectively, really, North Carolina, its higher institutions of higher learning are just a microcosm of all 50 states, what's going on there, because right?
Yeah, sure.
It's a homogenous kind of industry, and overpaid administrators, administrative bloat, all of these things that are happening around the country are happening right there in North Carolina. So what amazed me, and look, I'm a libertarian economic. I'm not an economist. I don't have a degree in it, but I've probably done more research and read more books than most so-called economists out there. And anytime you have an open checkbook with very low lending standards, you're going to have what we call malinvestment. And we have malinvestment in higher education on a grandiose, unimaginable kind of scale, don't we?
Yes, we do. I'm glad you used the word malinvestment. That's a good term used by the so-called Austrian School of Economics, and it is a very useful term to explain a lot of maladies in our society, not only in education, but more broadly, in society as nations go on these rampant borrowing sprees and debt issuance sprees and a whole variety of other things, massive increases in the size of government, interferences in the private sector, et cetera. There is a lot of malinvestment in higher ed. And indeed, I would even use the term overinvestment in higher ed. We have been sold a bill of goods as a nation by well-meaning people. Some of them are well-meaning, some of them are perhaps not so well-meaning. People who argued that you will not be a success in life unless you graduate from college, preferably a 4-year school. And so guidance counselors kept telling kids in high school that you must go to college, or you must at least contemplate going to college, plan on going to college. And so we had a rapid and substantial rise in college enrollments throughout our history, really, until very recently. I'll get to that in a minute. But in 1970, you mentioned that was roughly close to the time you were getting ready to go to college. About 11% of adults in the United States had college degrees, 11%. By today, it's over 30%, almost a third. So it's about tripled. So now everyone feels you've got to go to college. You've got to go to college or you're going to be unsuccessful. And there was a basis for that argument. College graduates do better than high school graduates. There are college graduates on average have more successful life in a financial sense, but that doesn't tell the whole story. And we have many people going to college who are ill prepared for school, who do poorly in school. We have 40% of the kids who enter college who never graduate, or at least don't within a reasonable period, say 6 years after entering a 4-year school. 40% don't make it out. Of those that do make it out, the 60% who do make it out, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York tells us about 40% of them, when they graduate, are what they call underemployed, taking jobs that are often filled or usually filled by high school graduates. So there's a lot of frustrated people who've gone to college and feel that they have been treated poorly. They end up with large amounts of debt, some of them without a degree, and so we got a problem.
Right.
Sorry, I'm talking too long.
No,
I'm
okay.
a college professor, and I talk in 50-minute sound bites, and you're a podcaster, and you talk probably in 50 seconds.
Yeah, well, we try, but I think the point is really important that this whole thing of everyone it's kind of like home ownership. The government's stated policy is every person should own their own home. And we saw what a disaster that was. So now the government's stated policy is every person should have a college degree. Look, I mean, and now there's some great databases. collegescorecard.edu.gov shows you how many people default in a given institution, how many graduate, and what their average student loan balance and monthly payment is. And it's shocking. But the point is that you can go become a welder and make $80,000 your first year out before overtime. And there is a shortage of those people. If you know how to fix an electric vehicle like a Tesla will pay you somewhere of $100,000 to $150,000 per year once you've gone through the training program. All of these jobs don't require any college education. And we've gotten away from the trade schools where you actually learn to do things with your hands. Now, look, I went to college, I became an attorney, and I am pretty handy, but I would have loved to know how to build a house or work on a car or work on an electric car, but it's probably too late for me now.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we do need some college graduates. No one saying we shouldn't have people who get professional training. We need lawyers. We need doctors. We need a whole variety of people who need specialized education. Engineers would be a good example. But accountants and so on. But we also need the kind of people you're talking about. We need welders, and we need the computer coders. I don't even know what they do exactly, but these coding academies are turning out students after a year or so of training who are getting the very best and brightest of them are getting good jobs, making high salaries, more than what a typical college graduate gets. Also, I might add, within college graduates, there's huge differences between different majors and all. Colleges love to be very progressive sounding, and we're out to save the world and everything. And why don't you major in gender studies? Because why don't you major in multicultural this or that, or African American studies? Well, the people that do major in those things, the data show, end up having dreadful experiences in the job market. Who wants to hire a gender studies major? I mean, to be honest with you, and some fields that I think are fairly important and reputable, like history, for example, or philosophy, are great subjects of studies, and they can maybe help develop critical thinking skills, writing skills, things of that nature, which are important in life. But in a direct sense, they don't do much to, enhance your income when you graduate. So history majors have a heck of a time getting jobs. And that's why the number of history majors has fallen off. In fact, that's something that bothers me a little bit, because I do think we need to understand our past, and we have a glorious past as Americans, and we don't often appreciate it fully.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm getting off the subject. I'm sorry.
Well, it's not really, because look, the whole concept of the liberal arts education, the true concept, and my daughter went to Boston University, and for her first 2 years, she was in the College of General Studies, and all they did was read literature and write for 2 years. And she complained, I said, just go transfer, don't bother me. And yet it was probably the best thing that happened to her, because when you read those classics and you learn how to write both creatively and objectively, it triggers critical thinking, and you look past whether it's the headlines in the newspapers or whatever. Critical thinking is key to being an effective member of society. And that's where you don't want to see the classic education be diminished. And yet it has. And we got people majoring in puppetry and human studies and, medieval
restoration,
right.
You name it.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting away from, anything terribly we still have people, of course, who are majoring in chemical engineering and accounting and subjects that have some degree of rigor to them. But we also have a lot of what you're talking about, and we have too much of what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And the kids have been poorly advised. The colleges have these professors who teach gender studies who need students in order to justify their being hired. And so the colleges push in this. And of course, the colleges are promoting diversity and inclusion, which is, to me, one of the worst things that ever happened. Now, you may think, oh, Vedder is some sort of crazy racist or something. I'm not a racist at all. I think we should have people of all kinds of backgrounds going to college, all sorts of political views. I'm for great openness and diversity of ideas, and even diversity of skin colors and diversity of sexual preferences, and all. Bring it all on. But we've made a fetish of some of this, and the University of Michigan has 100 people on its staff, close to 100, who are diversity and inclusion coordinators of one sort or other. They're getting paid $14 million, counting fringe benefits a year. And that's an awful lot of resources that are diverted from keeping the cost of college down, diverted from helping low-income kids to go to school. You name it. There are many, many better uses of that money.
Oh, for sure.
Anyway.
For sure. Well, you know what the definition of diversity is, don't you? It's celebrating our differences while pretending not to notice them.
I like that.
That's good one. It's got a nice ring to it. And it's really true when you think about it. So when we look at the damage that student loans have done, it's really been remarkable. And this ties into the presidential election. I don't want to get political, but Joe Biden was one of the guys who pushed to make private student loans non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. This is a millstone around a child's neck who will become a young adult's neck who's going to become an adult. And, they could have 6 figures worth of debt and never even get the degree and not know how they got there and not know how to get rid of it. They're trapped. And this is really the ultimate of what's worse. But the other thing is that it's made education worse. It's bloated these institutions, which you write about.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Osino Resources is a Ross Beatty-backed gold exploration company in mining-friendly Namibia. Osino's district-scale land package is situated near 2 producing gold mines, one of which Osino's management team previously developed and sold to B2 Gold. Osino's founders and management are experienced mining professionals who have already successfully developed and sold 2 companies in the past 7 years. Osino has an excellent shareholder base with Ross Beatty owning 20%, insiders 5%, and Resource Capital Funds 8%. This is an exploration company with drills turning that you'll definitely want to pay attention to. Osino trades in New York under the ticker OSIIF and in Toronto under the ticker OSI. To learn more, go to osinoresources.com. That's osinoresources.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Yeah, we have the single biggest thing that is wrong with higher ed in America, I think, is the federal, and there are many things wrong, but the single worst feature of our higher ed system is the federal student loan program. It was a program that has failed on every level. When it was put in, the goal was, well-intended goal in the mid-'60s, was to help lower income students who were poor get access to college. So we're going to help poor kids, lend them some money to go to college. Sounds like a good idea, perhaps. But like everything else, it got distorted. And in the late 70s, they expanded the loan programs to cover almost everyone, middle income people making, in today's dollars, maybe $100,000 a year can get student loans, those kind of people. And what did the colleges do? Bill Bennett said it well in the late 70s when he was Secretary of Education, and then again in the late 80s. He said, when these loan programs are all they're doing is enticing colleges to raise their fees more aggressively.
Exactly.
The colleges see, hey, these kids, they can borrow money, so let's raise our fee. Let's, instead of raising them 1 or 2 or 3%, let's raise them 5 or 6 or 7%. And that's what they did for 40 years. It's catching up with colleges now. They've gotten to the point where even fairly affluent people are having trouble paying the cost. And as you pointed out, people are starting to catch on to the fact that you can make a pretty good living as a welder or as an automobile mechanic or in a whole variety, or the computer coders that I was talking about. You can make a pretty good living doing some things that do not require a 4-year degree.
Yeah, exactly. And if you feel compelled to get a college education, first thing you should do is look at a state school. But before that, you should be taking AP courses in high school if you can get into them, if you're academically accomplished enough to do it. And it's worth working towards because all of those AP courses count for college credit. Then, if you're short of funds, you go to a community college. You can go there for 2 years. You overload on credits because the state school in that, if you're in Florida and you're going to a Florida community college, the state school, the 4-year college that you eventually transfer to is required by law to accept all of those credits that you've acquired for little or nothing at the community college. So by the time you get to the 4-year college and you transfer in, you might only have to pay a year to a year and a half's worth of tuition, which is still greatly, way lower than a private school. It could be 10 or 20% of what a private college is charging or university. And that's gaming the system and really sticking it to them because then, you can get by with a little bit of debt. Now, I had a guy on, he has a site, thecollegeinvestor.com. He says, do not take on more debt going to college than your average 1-year earnings that you're expecting to make when you graduate. So if you're going to make $75,000 as an engineer, take on $75,000 worth of debt. But if you're only going to make $35,000 as a teacher, don't take on more than $35,000. It sounds like good advice.
I think it is. That's my rule of thumb too. I said if the debt of a student upon graduation is greater than what his or her salary is or earnings are, then the student is overextended. And there are, unfortunately, quite a few students for whom that's true. By the way, I have a son who graduated in 3 years from college doing precisely what you were saying, back even when it was less fashionable to do so, AP courses, or I'm in a college town, so he walked over from as early as the junior high school in eighth grade and freshman English, took college freshman English as an 8th grader and got an A, and went on, graduated, was Phi Beta Kappa, all those kinds of things in 3 years. And one thing that a lot of colleges are finding now, my university is finding is actually sort of a problem, and in a way it's a good one. Kids are taking more and more college classes in high school now to such a large extent in some states that they're graduating from college faster because they have learned this lesson. And so the colleges aren't collecting as many years tuition off the kids. Most kids took 5 years, even though it was supposed to be a 4-year degree. They took 5. Now some of them are only taking 3.
Yeah, isn't that great?
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful because it's like sticking it to them. They're only too happy to stick it to you. You stick it back to them, and you wind up paying very little. And then if you can qualify for all sorts of other little goodies in the school, you can get grants. You might wind up getting a virtually free education or limited. In some states, right, community colleges are free, which is another huge mistake, because just like with housing, if you can buy a house for no money down and borrow money out and put money in your pocket with no equity, then your incentive to maintain that property in bad times isn't there. It's the same thing in education. If you have no skin in the game, then you're going to value that commodity far less than somebody who has to work 2 jobs to obtain a degree. So,
absolutely. I'm glad you used the word skin in the game. That's one of the big problems in higher ed is too many people don't have skin in the game. They don't face consequences if something goes wrong. Colleges hire these fancy presidents and senior administrators, and they're paid high salaries and all. Suppose they don't do a very good job and the colleges fall on hard times. What happens to the people who are running a place? Well, if not very much, usually, unless the school goes almost flat broke, and some of them are going broke these days, by the way.
Yeah.
So, whereas in the private sector, if you screw up in the private sector, the consequences are pretty severe. You lose your job. The company may go bankrupt. Eastman Kodak is a shadow of its former self. It almost doesn't exist. Enron doesn't exist. It was in the top 50 corporations in America in the year 2000. It doesn't exist anymore. It's bankrupt. Have you ever heard of a major American university go bankrupt? Top 50 university? No. There are we don't have enough skin in the game. We don't have enough incentives to do well or punishments for people who do poorly. And that's part of our problem.
Well, it's really interesting. So there is no survival of the fittest when it comes to higher education. There's only survival at the cost of indebting future generations, and making them dependent on effectively the government's handouts. There are a few colleges out there like Hillsdale that don't take any student aid, no federal student tuition assistance, and they're kind of free to teach and run the place exactly the way they please. With the internet here and with technology continuing to emerge, Richard, do you think we're going to see more of that?
Oh, absolutely. By the way, I am a huge fan of Hillsdale. I've been both on the Hillsdale campus this year, as well as their center in Washington, D.C., where they do run some educational programs as well. And schools like that are, for the most part, prospering. They offer something that's a little different than the traditional schools. I think the schools I think higher ed's in for a lot of trouble. I think several hundred schools will go out of business over the next decade. Some even go further. Clayton Christensen at Harvard thinks it's going to be in the thousands going out of business.
Really?
But it's going to certainly be an uptick from what we've been having. A lot of them will merge with other schools, rather than go completely out. They'll still be around in some form, I guess you might say. But this is a lot of this is starting to emerge. A lot is happening. The small liberal arts colleges are without any endowment or much reputation are really suffering. Very low-level state universities are suffering. They're having a hard time getting enrollment. Some parts of the country, of course, birth decline in births has contributed to it. Population is not growing rapidly in eastern states. Vermont had 5 liberal arts colleges, I think, closed last year. 5.
That's right. Yeah. Amazing.
In the little state of Vermont.
Yeah. So what we're seeing with malls today, shopping malls going out of business, being ghost malls, maybe we're going to see ghost colleges and universities in the not too distant future. That's certainly a possibility. Well, Richard, really appreciate your coming on, sharing with us your knowledge of a very corrupt and inefficient system. If you want to read Richard's work and check out more excellent information about this, go to jamesgmartin.center. That's jamesgmartin.center. And Richard's article is front and center there, latest article, and there's a lot of good things there. Really appreciate you coming on. Any questions or comments for Richard or myself, email us kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @KerryLutz, Facebook page Financial Survival Network, and visit our website, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Richard, we'll talk to you again when you write your next article.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. Bye-bye.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.